Okay, Shelley, yesterday we talked about Michael Bennett. And
Is he? Yes.
Okay, who is the NFL player, New England Patriots, who is probably the exact opposite of most players, because most players, when you get into, like, not necessarily just the NFL, but Major League Baseball, what do? They get a big contract. They go out and they buy a lot of bling. They buy a nice car, and they spend a lot of money. And the story is...
He's the one that saves his paycheck.
Yes, he opted out of direct deposit. He's getting a physical paycheck, and he keeps all of his paychecks throughout the season and does not cash them, does not put them into the bank until the end of the season. So essentially, he's working off, and he's budgeted himself very well, okay? Can I tell you, and this is in my radio history, and after we talked about this yesterday, I thought to myself, should I talk about this or not? I worked with the guy years ago. And unfortunately, he's no longer with us. And this is sort of a bizarre, weird story. But he was murdered probably, 15, 20 years ago. Strange story in the facts. First off, it was very, very, very sad that he was murdered. He was stabbed to death, mutilated, and then his house was set on fire. And a couple of days later, guy showed up at the police department, said, I did it, admitted to the crime, and they threw him in jail. And the guy was in jail, and everybody goes like, okay, fine. That was easy. They murdered him, and he admitted it. Then several years later, another guy came forward and said, no, I did it. And it turned out that the second guy really did do the murder. It wasn't the first guy. And they went back to the first guy and going like, okay, so why did you admit to this murder, when you had nothing to do with it? And he essentially was
five hots and a cot.
I guess it was sort of weird. And they released him from jail, because they proved, and the other guy, the guy who really did it, came forward and told him, all sorts of details of the crime that had never been made public. Anyway, the guy's name was, I worked with him years and years and years and years ago. And I mean, this is pretty much common knowledge in the radio business. And his air name was Jerry Hattrick. He was a hockey fan, and that wasn't his real name. And when he left our station, he became the program director, the bigwig at another station, which was our competitor. And he was a ruthless competitor. He would call us up on what we called the hotline, which was this private number which would ring in the air studio if the boss called you. And he would, cuss you out and tell you he was going to, you were going to lose your job because his station was going to do so much better, blah, 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 blah. But when he worked for us at the original KSLQ, he never cashed his paychecks. Never. And the lady, I still remember the lady who was our accountant, Debbie Murray, it just drove her batty. Because at the time, we were owned by a company out of New York. It was like some kind of a media company. Can't remember exactly who it was at the time. And they would call her and they would say, look, we're carrying, 32 paychecks. At one point in time, I think he had not cashed a paycheck for almost, I believe it was close to 2 years. So there were 2 years of paychecks that he'd never cashed because
I thought that they all had an expiration date.
Well, we talked about that yesterday.
Yeah, we did.
And supposedly it depends. If you get checks from some companies, it'll say void after 90 days. And depending upon the bank, some banks will not cash what they call a stale check if it's dated after such and such a date. But apparently on a payroll check, it's different. Because if you're paying someone, they're a, employee where they're getting a W-2 and all that kind of stuff, that it's a different situation. So he went for one time, I want to say, I think it was almost 2 years. And Debbie was like getting heat from the corporate people in New York. And she was going like, I talk to him almost on a weekly basis. Please cash your checks. Please cash some of them, because if you ever have a checking account and you're very good about that, what do? When you reconcile your checking account at the end of the month, you have to, account for the checks that have not cleared your account. So here's a situation where every month, you figure there's probably 2 paydays a month, maybe 3, depending on how you're getting paid, but for sure 2 if you're getting paid every other week. If you're getting paid weekly, essentially it's 4, times a month, sometimes 5 times a month, how the calendar sets up. And you have to carry these checks over month after month after month after month. And it was crazy. And to the point where at the station, people were going like, man, it must be nice. Because most of us were like, we'd cash our check and, and a day later we'd be broke again. You know what I mean? We didn't have any money. We're all, we weren't making that much money. But
I still live like that.